We're letting everyone in.
I think we're ready to go.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to hit it all.
Okay. We still have some more people joining. I'm just going to give it another second or two.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Okay, we will get started. We still have more people entering, but we will just let them join and come on in. Welcome everybody to CHAPA's COVID response call. I'm Rachel Heller, CEO at CHAPA. It's always so nice to see everybody during this continuing crazy time where we're just not connected physically anymore. We have a lot to cover on today's call. As usual, there's always so much going on. So just to give you an overview of what we'll talk about, and then I'll break down just by time, because we're gonna have to stick to the time blocks that we've set so we can make sure we get to everything. But today we wanted to start off our meeting talking about what private developers and affordable housing owners have been doing to help tenants. We know that early on, before we even had an eviction moratorium law in place, companies like Win and Beacon were committing to helping their tenants to stay stable, and they're continuing to do that work, and even agreeing to longer than the moratorium lasts to work with tenants and help them to stay in their homes. After that, we will have an update on what's been going on with the local emergency rental assistance programs. Katie Bosse from MHP will join us and give us an update on the new programs that have been created since the report came out just a couple weeks ago. Following that, we will talk about what is going on with fair housing. As we know, the Trump administration has been not only dismantling the fair housing law, but also making a lot of inflammatory statements about it. And so we are going to talk about how that work is continuing, particularly in the city of Boston, to ensure that we are affirmatively furthering fair housing. And then finally, before we get into the federal and state updates, we're going to talk about the eviction moratorium court cases that are happening, and Carol Maureen from CHAPA will give us an update on that. So to get started, we have 15 minutes that we want to focus on the private developer response. And so we are going to hear, sorry, I'm getting text at the same time. Okay, so we are going to hear from Win and Beacon. We have Larry Curtis, the president and managing partner of WinnCompanies. Many of you might have seen a couple of weeks ago that Win had committed to, again, working with tenants through the end of this year, and really they always do, to help tenants stay stable as they are dealing with various income changes right now. So Larry, I will turn it over to you. For those who don't know Win, they are a large affordable housing development company. They have many properties throughout Massachusetts and across the country. So Larry, we turn it over to you.
I'm up. Great. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Eric and Ryan as well, and our teams at Win for doing your part in keeping our community and residents safe. And thank you for Dara Kovel, who's going to speak after me, for being a real innovator and a real contributor to affordable housing in the state of Massachusetts. So this virus-driven recession obviously had an impact on our owned and managed portfolio. As Rachel says, we're a large operator. We're actually the largest manager of affordable housing in the United States. LIHTC deals, Section 8 deals, home, rad, urban, suburban, rural, senior, veterans, family, new, historic, naturally occurring, the whole works. And every single one of these properties has been affected. Most of our residents live in service industries, hospitality, janitorial, food service, retail, and their lives have been disrupted in a far more significant manner than any of us on this Zoom call. Rent collection is surprisingly stable. And I attribute that to two factors. One is the obvious relief funds that have come that we hope continue from state and federal and local resources in many local Massachusetts communities. And the other, I think, hasn't been spoken about as much, and that is the high quality affordable housing that CHAPA advocates for and the industry in Massachusetts create has allowed for residents to do anything and everything possible to stay in such high quality housing. I think it's a topic that deserves more attention and maybe some more research in contrast to some other lesser quality affordable housing. So at Win, we've taken a four-prong approach to the issues facing housing in our portfolio over the last 5 or 6 months. Early on, we decided to stop evictions. This is something Rachel's mentioned, and we have encouraged our residents that have lost jobs, lost economic income to pursue good faith payment plans with such households. We didn't understand the push to evict. You evict, you get a vacant unit, and you get a vacant unit that maybe someday vacates after a long battle. And we felt it was better to work with residents. By late April, we were proactively assisting the eligible residents in securing emergency assistance monies. We're not unique in this, but we felt that language barriers and otherwise barriers and natural abilities made it such that we wanted to help the residents fill out forms, make it user-friendly to get the resources that can help them stay in their homes. We created online platforms that help connect tenants to the social services that were available to them. And we were therefore focused more on housing stabilization than any kind of punitive court actions that may be out there. These approaches, as you can imagine, has created great stress on our property managers. It's created great stress at tenant engagement, and it's created great stress financially. It's cost us and others that are doing similarly a lot of money in trying to do the right thing at the properties. I think the whole industry at the property management level and the advocacy level and the ownership level has risen to the challenge. And each owner faces their own financial pressures. Undercapitalized or lesser capitalized nonprofit may have a different need than a developer that's been in business for 50 years, like Win or Beacon. So we're, I think, the largest operator of affordable housing in Massachusetts. 12,000 plus individuals accessing these state monies, these federal monies, these local monies. What can go wrong? Well, we all know what can go wrong. The monies may stop. The abilities without such monies, we'd have, I could be blunt, we'd have a disaster on our hands, and we literally would have a disaster. We're advocating at the federal level, at the highest level of the highest levels of the federal level, at HUD and elsewhere, to have these monies continue at the state level. All of us are doing so. I think it's being heard, and I think we will have ongoing resources to help families. What's needed is more unemployment assistance, more emergency relief, and more recognition, I would suggest, that owners are trying to do the right thing. They're more and more, that I think, self-serving, but owners have been in this pandemic often put forth as the bad guys, throwing out the tenants, getting rid of those people. And most of the ownership community in Massachusetts, most of the affordable housing community in Massachusetts is really trying to do the right thing. And we hope that becomes recognized because it's true. So we look at housing as more than just housing. We look at it as a way to create communities, a way to create education, a way to uplift people in their lives. And And in many ways, we've been tested during this pandemic. We will continue to be tested. And I think the industry will come out of this stronger and better and more cohesive than it went into it. And so if there's anything we could do, it's continue to advocate for more public resources to help serve people and residents that are doing everything right by their families. They've worked hard, they're trying to stay in their homes, and we as an industry should do everything possible to continue to allow that to happen. So Rachel, thank you for including me on this call, and I think I turn it back to you now. So thank you.
Thank you. We will come back for questions in just a moment. So let's now turn to Dara Kovel from Beacon. Dara, I think, is still on the phone and not by video. So Dara,
Yep.
you're there. Excellent.
I'm here. So thanks, Rachel. And sorry, for whatever reason, I'm actually in part of Connecticut right now. And for those of you who heard the news, like we got the state of Connecticut particularly battered by the tropical storm. So there's little electricity and little cell coverage. So hence I'm not on video. But thank you for having. Oh, no, my pleasure. I'm just hoping my battery lasts long enough for me to finish the remarks and stay on the phone for the rest of the call. Thanks for having us. Rachel, thanks to you and Eric and the rest of your team for the amazing work you guys are doing on advocating for resources and supporting the stability of housing for residents across the state. And Larry obviously did a tremendous job in kind of laying out and framing the issue. I think for us also to credit the work of the site staff and our property management teams and our community engagement staff who do the resident services work during this time. We really can't thank them enough because they're sort of on the front lines trying to keep people engaged and stably housed and deal with sort of the safety issues and the challenges of COVID-19. And also just as Larry alluded to, you know, anti-eviction work has been part of our mission for many years now in Boston prior to COVID-19, and that nobody wants anyone to lose their housing, and now more than ever, it's important to us to keep people in their houses while they get through this economically challenging time, not to mention sort of the public health emergency and crisis that we're facing. I'm just going to walk through really quickly where we've been and where we are now in terms of the work with the residents and just property management challenges. And I'm sure this is familiar to some of you, but just to set the context, it was our first few months, obviously, were crisis management at all of our sites. We have 150 properties, about 60 of those are here in Massachusetts. And we were really focused on just, making sure we were dealing with emergency management issues and maintenance and getting people's rent collected and keeping people safe, cleaning, sanitizing. Most people were in their units. But immediately during that time, our resident services coordinators turned their attention to making phone calls to residents to see if they were healthy, to see if they were getting their needs, to make sure they had food. And that was sort of the early stages of this crisis. We had so many calls to make, you can imagine thousands of units of properties, thousands of households. We engaged some of our home office staff. So, we just had basically a phone bank raft of people calling to make sure that people were okay. As the immediate crisis subsided, we kind of moved into what we considered sort of our first sort of back to work phase in early July. And from that perspective, our RSCs continue to, particularly at senior properties, call the residents, but we started to shift gears a little bit, and I'll talk about that in a second. We have during the month of July, just on the property management side, that has meant for us, we started with virtual tours of properties. So obviously as people need housing and want to get into available units, we had been turning units, but we not until the beginning of July did we start doing virtual tours and then in-person tours, which we just started last week. And again, this is all with the safety of our staff in mind, balancing it with the need to get people housed, balancing it with, just trying to keep people socially distant. We've also begun just this week, we're beginning new protocols for in-unit inspections because we've noticed that we've gotten a lot fewer work order calls from residents, which we assume is because people are nervous about having someone in their unit. They may not know like what the right thing to do is. So we now have a new 8-minute protocol where our maintenance guys are going into units, checking all the life safety features in particular, and just doing a quick visual to see if there's anything wrong. This is, again, we're just beginning this next week and rolling it out so that we can deal with what we know is a big backlog of maintenance issues as people have been sheltering in place and kind of basically keeping to themselves. Another kind of interesting juncture that we're at, we have struggled, as other property management and owner companies have done, in trying to think about opening amenities. We made a decision a couple of weeks ago. We're not going to open pools, for example. Many of our peers have decided to open pools and do timed, certain limited access and scheduling of access to pools. We decided that was going to be a big challenge. Like fitness centers, we just weren't comfortable kind of dealing with the exposure and the potential policing and monitoring of people's safety that would require. That being said, we have opened other amenities, including dog parks and roof decks and various other activities. We have anything outdoors, like community gardens. And all these things, again, require the staff to manage and maintain, make sure people aren't sort of forgetting to wear their masks and not standing close to each other and all these other things. So those are the kinds of things that we've been kind of really wrestling with over the last couple of weeks. And I think we've come to a good balance. Some of the really exciting stuff on the resident services side, we started a trial at a property that we have in Lynn called St. Stephen's, where we were creating kind of a telehealth access setup where a resident would come down to a private room. We would have it set up either in a computer learning center or with a tablet, where they could then consult with what would have normally been a visiting nurse at the property, but now was just someone remote. But it gave people a chance to do some preventative care and make sure their medications were in order. And we're rolling that out now more broadly across our senior properties, because we really believe that that's an important aspect of making sure that people kind of get through this difficult and critical time. So those are some of the things, I think as, we watch the numbers and, whether we're going to stay flat or tick up or tick down, all these decisions about giving people access to various gathering places has just been really wrought and challenging. But I think we're in the right space, and we're trying to make sure we keep that stable and keep people engaged, and both mentally, emotionally, socially, physically. We're getting back to some of our socially distant chair yoga activities at our senior facilities and the like. And then just the last note I wanted to share, which has been a challenge that Larry also alluded to, is rent collection has been stable. Obviously, we have this challenge of unemployment going away. Presumably, Congress will wake up and start, open the spigot again, so people don't, end up with no income, and we have an even bigger crisis on our hands. But even with the huge resources that the state of the Commonwealth and the city of Boston have made available for rent assistance, it's been hard in a lot of our properties, at least, to convince people to apply for the resources, to get the resources, to understand that even though their rent, there's an eviction moratorium, that their rent is still due, and that we're trying to find ways to get them the resources to stay housed. So that's just to say it's a really complex time, and messaging and communication and very active engagement has been our strategy, and we will continue to work at it and hope that we can help people get through this time and get to the other side of this pandemic. So I'll stop there, Rachel, and if there are questions or other comments, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. If anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat. I have a couple questions that I'll ask while we wait. One, I just want to thank you both for joining us today, and then all the work that you're doing both to help people stay stable and then also well. I appreciate all the work of the property management teams and how they're trying to keep life somewhat normal for people. Larry, you had touched upon the disaster we're facing if people aren't able to pay rent. And Dara talked about unemployment continuing. You had mentioned that as well. Can you just give us a sense of what is it, how, everyone hears about reserves that that private developers have or that owners have. How long can you go, and how much can you absorb when people are unable to pay rent? So what does that look like? So we fully understand, that paying the rent is critical. And what happens when we don't? Do we end up with bank-owned properties? Like what does the course look like? What does the path look like? And why are all the rental assistance programs so critical?
So I'll give the short version of that question, the answer to that question, and that is, so every property has lenders, they have tax credit equity, sometimes there's soft debt. There are various participants in each and every endeavor, as we know. And that property, call it Property X. Property X may have reserves, it may have cash flow, it may have otherwise allocated money for capital. So when a property has cash flow, it's easy. A developer just makes less money, right? Probably a lot on the phone would say that's a good thing, right? So it's so that's the first avenue to attack. The second are operating reserves built into the lending vehicle. How are those reserves used? When they could be used? That requires interface with lenders. Third, or tax credit equity. Third are capital reserves. Capital reserves, well, we all know that any property can be creating cash flow by setting in deferred maintenance. So what we don't want as an industry is to have the end result of all this be properties with tons of capital needs because deferred maintenance sets in, and so that's another way. And the other way is the last way, and it's not one that the lenders on the phone would want, is mortgage relief. Thus far, I think there's been very little of that: interest relief, debt service relief, principal relief. But those are, and I guess the fifth is a developer, beyond the resources of a given deal, reaches into their pocket, reaches into their net worth, be it a nonprofit or for-profit developer, and that's happened in instances because properties, they're properties that don't start off with cash flow. The industry is such that many properties that have been built as affordable housing, because of prudent resource allocation at DHCD or MHFA or MHP, didn't have tons of debt service coverage, didn't have tons of cash flow, didn't have tons of reserves. And as a result, we're running out of room for attack effectively. And I think that answers your question, Rachel.
Yeah, I would just add, I think it's fair to say that many of our properties are, have been underwritten with the assumption of there being moments in time where there would be kind of dips in revenue, right? There would be some economic downturns, a spike in operating expenses, or what have you. But I don't think anyone who was underwriting a deal over the last decade could have projected sort of this level of disruption in the market. That being said, I think we're in a fortunate, particularly some of the larger owners and managers are in a fortunate position to have strong portfolios with strong operating reserves. We've had an amazing kind of support and leadership from Mass Housing and MHP and others saying, like, we want to help you, we want to help figure out a way through this. And, to keep in mind that rent, first and foremost, goes to pay for, utilities and operating expenses and staff and maintenance, as Larry alluded to, and then debt service. And so it's important for us to make sure that the whole of the property is in good shape over the long term. But first and foremost, we really are looking at these other resources, whether it's, the reduction of just over any margin on the cash flow, the reserves. And I think in most cases, so far, so good. Without again, if there's this huge disruption in unemployment, I think that really has been the Band-Aid that's gotten us through to this point. And people have been, obviously, most of our residents are paying their rent. If they have the resources, they're writing that check. It's absolutely, it's great to see. But if all of a sudden people don't have that resource to pay, then we have a whole different level of challenge. But it really is a testament to to the lenders and investors and our, I think, our prudent stewardship of these resources, that we are in a good place to kind of weather at least the storm for now, and hopefully it doesn't get that much worse over the next 6 months.
Let's hope Congress comes through with unemployment and more.
Exactly.
We'll wrap up, but I do want to ask what I hope is a hopeful question. You know, it's clear from the pandemic, as it wasn't clear to all of us before, how important a safe, healthy, affordable home is. And my question for both of you is, can we expect affordable housing development to continue through this challenging time? Do you have deals in the works? Should we see, you know, will we see new units coming online? Because we know we need some more permanently affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start there if it's okay. I mean, we have been spending in the 13 states we're in, spending time talking about the way affordable housing investment construction can lead the way out of an economic downturn like the one we're having. Obviously, in 2008, 2009, during the financial collapse, the federal government stepped in. Some states stepped in and really tried to use the investment of the infrastructure of affordable housing to turn around sort of the construction, the job losses, and some of the economic devastation that followed that. And this is another opportunity. And the state of Massachusetts is really at the forefront of all of that thinking and that work. In the governor's economic development bill, there's proposed this $20 million to add in state credits, which is phenomenal given, the challenge that this kind of crisis brings to the coffers of a state or any of the cities and towns in Massachusetts. So it's a huge opportunity, and it really is a down cycle, counter-cyclical opportunity for states to double down on affordable housing and make it a leading charge out of what would otherwise be a very, very difficult time on the construction and job side.
Two follow-up comments, Dara, and that is, I think your response to the second question leads back to the first question, and that is, where do developers, be it for-profit or nonprofits, get the resources to put forth pre-development capital on deals, which are increasingly significant, $500,000, $1 million per deal? They come from the cash flow, largely, of successful affordable housing. When that goes poof, the opportunities for continued pursuit diminishes. So I think one ties into the other. Relative to past downturns, I think some of the creative aspects that have particularly come out of the state of Massachusetts, out of the Commonwealth, we've learned from past downturns. In the early 90s, we turned failed condos into affordable housing. We turned blighted, naturally occurring affordable housing into long-term, deed-restricted, affordable or mixed-income housing. In 2008, similarly. So I think we know how to do it. All of us on the phone, on the Zoom call, know how to do it. And as I often say, the only way to do it is to do it. We could talk about doing it. We could plan on doing it. We could write it down that we're going to do it, or we could actually do it. And it's, I think, and it takes resources. And those resources, we're fortunate that we're in a state that recognizes that affordable housing is an economic development tool. We're fortunate that this governor and this lieutenant governor have a strong feeling to building communities throughout the Commonwealth and building up the lives of its citizens. So it's, I'm optimistic. I'm scared to death relative to what may happen if the rent payments stop. But I'm also optimistic that we're going to come out of this with better affordable housing and a better development community and better advocacy that has existed prior. So that, I think, answers your question.
That is a great note to end on. And I'm sorry to Steve and Phil who put questions in the chat. Larry, I know Dara can't answer them right now. If you can take a moment and maybe respond to Steve and Phil while we move on to that question about rental assistance. So we know that rental assistance is critical to our properties and helping people stay stable. We're now going to hear from Katie Bosse, Program Coordinator for Mass Housing Partnership, to give us an update on what communities are doing to establish rental assistance programs. Katie, I turn it to you.
Hi everyone, good to see you. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen. the infographic. There we go. So like Rachel, can I get a thumbs up that we can see this okay? Or did it not share?
Yep, yeah, I give a thumbs up. I can see it.
Okay, gotcha. All right, as Rachel said, my name is Katie Bosse from MHP's Community Assistance Team, and I'm just gonna update you from the report and survey that was released last June. The survey was conducted by MHP, DHCD, and CHAPA, and the data was collected from May 8th to May 26th. And we did this to get a read on what communities were adopting programs and what kind of programs they were designing. So with that information gathered from the report, we have since created a database so communities can learn from each other and to help the state track what's going on the local level. So we've been following up with a lot of you, and I just wanted to say thank you for the constant communication and keeping us updated. So more on the database later in just a moment, but I wanted to direct your attention to the infographic I have up. I'm going to share some of the key highlights that we put together from data up to this first week of August. So since we now have 83 communities in the state that have created an emergency rental assistance program, that's 35 more than May when we collected this data for the survey. And there's about 9 communities that are working on it right now or considering putting together a program. The total amount pledged has increased to over 30 million. That's about a $9.2 million increase since May. And excluding Boston, which pledged many millions, we wanted to keep that out. The average program allocation is about 4,509 and 550,000, excuse me. And but I think important note we wanted to make on these programs being created is that there's a wide range. The smallest program created was about 15,000, and then we had 8 million, which was Boston. So especially for smaller towns, don't think that you need to allocate like 500K plus to have an effective program. I think that's a great takeaway from this. And then looking at the infographic, some of the similar trends we're seeing from May is the targeted area median income is still mostly 100 to 80% area median income. Communities are still mostly using CPA and trust funds to fund their programs. The average assistance per household is still about 3,850. I think that's up just a little bit from last time. And most communities are having local or regional organizations administer their programs, which is great because we identified that as a best practice in the beginning. Those are the key highlights, but just a minute on the database that we created. So the database now lives on the Housing Toolbox, and it will be updated on a rolling basis. There's instructions at the top of the spreadsheet on how to update us with information. You can either email me, my email is provided at the top of the spreadsheet, or fill out the link that's provided to a Google form. We do ask that only municipalities or program administrators submit the information so we can keep it as accurate as possible. And then just a quick note, you might see we still have a couple communities with some not specified information. So if you see that and know the answers to it, please send our way. And just on how to use some great uses for the database, a shout out to Whitney at CHAPA. She took a lot of time to do some detective work to put together links to the programs and applications, as well as contact information to program administrators. So we really encourage you to use that tool to use the network and call each other, ask questions about the program and program design, and how people's programs are going. And then I'll just end with announcement that DHCD, CHAPA, and MHP will be hosting a webinar in mid-September to hear from communities who have had their programs going up for a while and reflect on best practices and lessons learned. So more information to come on that. CHAPA and MHP will be sharing registration info soon. So thank you all for the updates and for stepping up with local funds to help families and individuals stay in their homes. And that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Katie. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat because I need to move us along so we can stay on time. But thank you so much for the update. And now we are going to talk a little bit, turn our attention to fair housing. So as you likely know, the Trump administration has removed the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule that has had since 2015. That does not mean that we need to give up on furthering fair housing. And we are now going to hear from Will Onuoha, who's the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Fair Housing and Equity. And Will is responsible for ensuring fair and equitable access to housing opportunities throughout Boston. So he is going to give us a sense of what Boston is doing to ensure that we are making it so that people can live in any community and neighborhood where they would like to live. Will, are you there? I turn it to
Yes,
you.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I see you. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be on the call, on this Zoom meeting or chat with you. So as you know, the last 2 weeks have been really interesting with HUD rolling back their affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. And this is the one that I believe came about in 2015 that President Obama was able to put in place, or even prior to that. And so for quite some time, we had a feeling this was going to happen. But one of the things that we have done in Boston is we are committed to still following the affirmatively fair housing rule, affirmatively furthering fair housing analysis of impediments that the Obama administration put forward, because we thought that that was a really, really good tool for us to, one, look at what we're doing as a city and figure out how we address this, doing more fair housing or addressing fair housing problems on a systemic level, right? We know that fair housing has been an issue for quite some time, and quite recently, we just, as of July 1, probably many of you guys are aware of the Globe article that came out that dealt with race and voucher holder discrimination that was happening in Boston and Metro Boston. So meaning Boston and all the cities and towns surrounding Boston. And it was very damning, but to be honest, it didn't tell us anything that we didn't already know. All it did was just pretty much produce evidence, irrefutable evidence that cannot now be argued against, because we now have this information and it's been out there. In any event, one of the things that has done is our office has ramped up its efforts to really make sure that we work with the agencies that were able to do some of this testing, but also produce our own testing. So what we plan to do is test, throughout the entire year. It'll be very random testing. Folks won't know, obviously, who the testers are, but we want to make sure we have that mechanism in place because we want to increase the enforcement that we do with testing. We want to know who these actors are that are engaging in these discriminatory practices. One, we want to increase enforcement against them. We also want to be, and one of the things we're going to do with that information is we're going to do some public shaming. And I'm just going to be very honest and say, we certainly are going to do a lot of public shaming. We're going to put it out there. We're also going to share this information with the Attorney General and the LRC, Lawyers for Civil Rights, because this is something that has plagued our city for such a long time. This is one of the unfortunate, sad histories that Boston has that really needs to be dealt with. Also, one of the good things that have come out of that article is we also were able to partner with the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. We've had a number of meetings with them to date. And so information that we get from the testing that we do, meaning positive IDs where landlords, real estate brokers, banks, lenders, whomever engage in these discriminatory practices, we're also going to share it with them. So they can also take some action against any one of these folks if they are in their membership as well too. So I know I've said a lot, so just to back up a little bit. So as a city, we are still committed to making sure we follow the analysis and impediments. We are working very hard very closely with the CAC that was put together that looks at everything that we're doing as a city and critiques us and make sure that we are dealing with these issues in a manner that makes sense. And so we're committed to it. We're working with our CAC. We continue to meet with them. We continue to draft our analysis and impediments. And so far, we've been going back and forth on looking at what we put in there to make sure that it actually addresses these issues. And I think we're approaching a very comfortable place, if not being in a comfortable place right now, that tells a fair and accurate story. We've been also able to increase our funding. That's going to allow us to do more as an agency when it comes to increasing our fair housing efforts. We've got some grants that have just kicked in that is going to allow us to do a lot more education and outreach, because especially during this COVID era, we know that there's a lot of discrimination that is taking place. We also know that there are landlords and realtors and who are using the pandemic as reason to engage in some of their discriminatory practices. And these are folks whom we're going after. So what's going to happen moving forward is you'll be seeing an annual report that comes out of the Boston Fair Housing Commission that will highlight all of the cases, all of the people who we have had to do enforcement against in the year. There will be a lot of public shaming. I'm not going to lie. There will be a lot of public shaming. But what it's to do is just to highlight who is actually engaging in discriminatory practices and what we are doing about it and what we expect other agencies to do about it as well too. So we are at a place where I think we're comfortable, and comfortable in the sense that we are ready to take on this issue. We're not letting go. In fact, we're going to have more aggressive approaches as the year continues, especially into the fall. And so I don't take too much time. I'm willing to answer any questions anyone might have for me.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please put it into the chat. Ryan has also posted the new HUD rule language that replaces the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. And Will, I want to thank you for both talking about the kind of the two sides of the Fair Housing Act, the enforcement that needs to happen and the discrimination that we have just recently read the report about and knew was there, but also the analyzing what the impediments are and what, more of the systemic, the rules that really reinforce a lot of this. And we talk about this a lot here, just, the history of our land use laws and how they have created the segregation that we see. So thank you for touching upon both of those things.
And one other thing I'll say very quickly, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that, so we're also pursuing an opt-ed that I think you guys should look for, that's coming out pretty soon. We will be pursuing an opt-ed to the Globe article that came out on July 1st. So that's something that we think, folks should just look out for. And any collaborations we can do with anyone on this Zoom chat, we're also willing to do as well too. So just keep that in mind and keep us in mind.
Excellent. We absolutely will. This is something that many of us are very focused on, and we'll definitely be following up. I'm just looking to see, there's some questions that came in. Which is more of a comment. Okay, yep, the comment on housing production plans, and you got a thank you for the good work. If any more, are you going to be on the call? So if any more questions come up as we move into
Sure.
the excellent. Thank you so much. Well, that was helpful, and we will be following up. Moving on to the eviction moratorium. So as you know that we have an eviction moratorium in place. The governor's extended it through October. There have been court challenges to the eviction moratorium. CHAPA has filed amicus brief in the state case, and Carol Marine is going to fill us in just on where those court cases stand and what's happening. So Carol, I turn it to you.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Hi, everybody. I'll give an overview because I know we're short on time, but the courts have been very busy this week with eviction moratorium challenges. Maturin v. Commonwealth was filed in Superior Court, and the companion case, Baptiste v. Commonwealth, is in U.S. District Court. So last Thursday, over 300 people live streamed Judge Paul Wilson's hearing on whether to grant an injunction to stay the moratorium. The suit was brought by two landlords who seek to end the ban, claiming infringement of their right to access to the courts, violation of separation of powers, and a taking of property. In that proceeding, the judge allowed Greater Boston Legal Services and Mass Legal Law Reform to participate as enhanced amici and to argue on behalf of four community groups: City Life Vita Urbana, Chelsea Collaborative, Lynn United, and the Springfield No One Leaves. That judge took a very expansive view of the proceeding, and gerbils had equal time to argue on each issue and add significant housing policy considerations. They expanded on the Attorney General's arguments focusing on housing instability, particularly the increase in evictions leading to increased homelessness and overcrowded housing conditions, both of which will increase the viral spread. And has been highlighted recently, the increase in those evictions will disproportionately impact Black and Brown households. As Rachel said, CHAPA, along with MACDC and Mass Public Health Association, submitted an amicus brief highlighting those arguments, but we also focused on what the legislature, the administration, and cities of towns have been able to do since the moratorium was enacted. We now have made available $20 million in RAFT, 20 in IRMA, and as Katie said, over 30 million in local rental assistance through the ERA program, all for preserving tenancies and stabilizing landlords and properties. Ironically, the need to preserve those tenancies and stabilize properties is the one area of overlap between the parties. So that case will be, the judge said he will decide it as soon as possible. Just briefly, there was a federal case filed. The plaintiffs separated their claims. And in that case, there was an almost 4-hour hearing yesterday. Judge Wolf seems inclined to abstain from filing until the court case is resolved, but that'll be determined. So stay tuned for more for updates. The federal case probably won't go forward until mid-August, and we're waiting for a decision on the state case. I will post later on our brief along with affidavits from neighborhood developers, Pine Street Inn, and Megan Sandell of Children's Health Watch. So thanks.
Thank you, Carol. Great update, super brief. Now we are going to move into all that's been happening in state and federal policy. We have about 15 minutes. Ryan, Eric, hopefully you have some good news for us. Ryan, turn it to you.
Not too much good news, but as you all know, the federal eviction moratorium and the $600 unemployment benefits ended last week. So we're all anxiously waiting for leadership on both the Democratic side and the Republican side to come to some type of an agreement regarding the next COVID-19 relief package. And, they gave themselves a kind of self-imposed deadline for them to come to an agreement by the end of this week, Friday is when the Senate is supposed to go out on their August recess. And hopefully we can get some type of an agreement between the two. But from everything that we've been hearing, they're still kind of trillions of dollars away on kind of agreeing to that next package. As you may all recall, the HEROES Act was around $3 trillion for that package, and then the Senate Republicans' proposal was around $1 trillion. So to talk a little bit about the HEROES Act, which was released by the Senate Republicans last week, that was a $1 trillion package that also included some funding for housing and homelessness, including $2.2 billion for Section 8 vouchers, $1 billion for public housing, as well as $100 million for rural housing. It did not, however, include any extension to the eviction moratorium, any additional kind of funding for rental assistance, and it also didn't include any of the fixes that we wanted for LIHTC, including the 4% minimum. Outside of that, though, however, they did include some flexibility for the CARES Act funding. As we've discussed on previous phone calls, the coronavirus relief fund money that we have here in the state is a large pot of money that the governor has been waiting on to see if we got additional guidance on whether or not we can use that funding for some of our budget shortfalls. And in the HEALS Act, the Senate Republicans included that flexibility so that all of that type of the CDBG money, the CRF money, ESG money can all be used for, trying to, I guess, fill in some of these budget shortfalls. In addition, the December 30th incurred by deadline for the coronavirus relief fund has now been extended to 90 days after the FY21 budget cycle ends. So for us in Massachusetts, that means at the end of July, we'll have 90 days after that to spend all of the coronavirus relief fund money. So that does give us a little bit of hope for cities and towns to have some of that funding. But we have been pushing for some of our priorities, including increased rental assistance, right to counsel, among other things, to be included in the coronavirus relief fund spending. And we are not so sure if that's going to be passed coming up, but it is good to know that the state and the cities and towns will have some additional funding. We'll continue to push for our delegations, including some of the New England delegations, to prioritize housing and homelessness in the next coronavirus relief fund package. But a lot of these conversations are happening behind closed doors between leadership, and we just really hope that they can come to some type of agreement by the end of the week. There are a bunch of other kind of federal updates, but I would kind of refer you to our COVID-19 resource page, which has our federal updates on there. And there's been a bunch of other ones that have come up over the past month, and I'll continue to update that as we go along.
Excellent, thank you. Eric, stateside.
Thanks, Rachel. And I do have good and exciting news to share, so I can finish things off on a high note. So last week was theoretically the end of the legislative session for the legislature, but since then they've chosen to extend that, and in that time the House and the Senate also passed the final versions of their economic development bills, and between the two versions, the House and the Senate version, there were some really outstanding, exciting things for housing and affordable housing. And a lot of priorities that CHAPA, and I know so many of you have been working to advocate for. I'm going to talk about this in a second, but given, just talking then about timing, what's happening right now. Right now, the House and the Senate, because the legislative session has been extended, they have more time to reconcile the differences between the two bills, and that's what's happening right now. A conference committee has been appointed, and we're hoping to see a conference report, so a reconciled bill within the next few days, possibly, or within the week, but really there is no deadline, so we're not too sure on when that might be. Turning back then to the substance of the bill, I think the first thing to mention is that both the House and the Senate passed housing choice provisions. These are the items that CHAPA and certainly the Baker administration has been working on that would lower that required vote for a certain smart growth and affordable housing permits and bylaws, lower that from a 2/3 majority to a simple majority. This has been something that has been, we've been working on for the better part of 3.5 years. I know Larry Field is joining us. I see him here, and I just want to give just a shout out and a thank you to him for all his hard work on that. We are hopeful and optimistic that this will be included in the final bill that is presented to the governor, and that of course the governor will sign it because he's been pushing this hard too. So that's a really exciting thing. A difference between the House and the Senate version with the housing choices, that amongst those items of bylaws that can be passed by a simple majority, the Senate included inclusionary zoning bylaws. So those inclusionary zoning bylaws could be passed by a simple majority. In the House version, the inclusionary zoning bylaws were not included on that list of items that can be passed by a simple majority. So that's the thing that we're waiting to see if that's included, if inclusionary zoning bylaws are included, and we're hoping that they are, so that cities and towns can say that if there is new housing that's built and it's multifamily housing, that a certain percentage of it shall be set aside as affordable. In its package of zoning reforms that were included in the economic development bills, the Senate did housing choice, but they also went further with their zoning reforms. They included a provision that would require communities that are served by the MBTA to have at least one zoning district where multifamily is allowed as of right around a public transportation, whether that's commuter rail or in some cases a ferry terminal, but within a certain amount of distance around public transportation, there would be multifamily housing allowed as of right. This has been a longstanding priority of CHAPA's, and we were excited to see the Senate pass it. The challenge here is, this may be hard to include in a final economic development bill. We know that there's, the difference between a housing choice and a mandate. A housing choice still leaves it up to a community about whether they want to pass that zoning bylaws, and it makes it easier for them to take that action. Whereas a mandate would require communities to act. And there's in communities in the MMA we know who have been outspoken against requiring communities to do anything. So we'll see where that comes out in the final bill. The Senate bill also includes a overall housing production goal for the state, but also an affordable housing production goal. Again, this is something that CHAPA has been supportive of, and in saying that we need to set goals so that we can work towards them, see how we're doing in our progress, and then adjust our policies and resources accordingly so that we're able to achieve those. Finally, around zoning reforms, I'll just mention that the Senate bill also included a butter appeals reform. So this would change the process by which neighbors can object to a proposed development near them. And this would set a bond requirement for that judges could impose for a butter appeals if the court feels that the underlying protests against the development lacks merit. This is something that we have seen used as a tactic to delay, and in some cases just stop development and affordable housing developments in its tracks. So again, we're hopeful that this makes it through to the to the final bill. In terms of resources for affordable housing included in the economic development bill, Dara mentioned this earlier, but the House version of the bill included a temporary $20 million expansion of the state low-income housing tax credit. And this is really exciting because we know that we need to keep on building affordable housing during a recession, during our economic downturn. We need more affordable housing, and this would allow us to be able to build that. And it's also something that will create some great jobs during our economic recovery. So we're hopeful that that will be included in the final bill. Other items that were included in the economic development bill, both the House and the Senate took up eviction records and sealing certain eviction records. We know that when someone does face an eviction, that can stay on their permanent record. This is something that can prevent people from applying for or finding housing in the future if that eviction record is on their file. And so the House version would bar minor children from being named in any eviction case. The Senate includes that as well, but then again goes further, a little bit further. They create a process by which in no-fault eviction cases, and not a case that I'm paying non-payment of rent, that there is a process for these eviction records to be sealed. Again, that will help that person to get it off their record and to not be something that can prevent them from finding housing in the future. We were excited that both the House and the Senate included language that would create an appointment process for tenant board members on housing authority boards and towns. This is something that we've been working for several years along with tenant groups and DHCD. So again, hopeful that because it was included on both sides of the House and Senate, that'll be in the final bill. The other resources included for affordable housing, the House and Senate both included capital authorization for supporting the production and preservation of affordable housing around public transit, as well as climate resilient and sustainable affordable housing. And the House and Senate also both included funding for neighborhood stabilization, the neighborhood stabilization program, which we know has been a priority of MACDC for a long time, for putting blighted or abandoned properties back to good use in neighborhoods around the Commonwealth. I know I'm up at 3 o'clock, so I'm going to pause there and just say that there's so much more that's been going on. We have a state budget that, because again, the legislative session is extended, that's expected to now be taken up sometime this fall. So we'll be taking part in advocating for our affordable housing resources there. I'm going to post a link to the news brief that we just released today that covers almost everything that you would want to to know about, what's going on in affordable housing here in Massachusetts. So I'll stop there, see if there are any questions, but want to say thank you all for joining us. Thank you to all the speakers. I know we're at 3, so if you can stay on, I'm willing to stay on and take some questions. But meanwhile, I hope everybody has a wonderful August and stays healthy and safe, and look forward to having you on our next COVID call. So as people stay on, I'll just say there's a question from Brad. Should organizations reach out to the economic development conferees to support these pieces? Yes, that can't hurt. That's always a helpful thing to do. The conference committee, if you go to the CHAPA website and to the news item about the economic development bill, the conference committee members are included on that. And those include the chairs of Ways and Means and the chairs of the economic development bill committee, the economic development committees. And they're the ones who are really deciding what makes it into the final bill. So yes, you can reach out by email or by phone calls to their offices and share the priorities on affordable housing that you want to see make it through to the final bill. And then hopefully then for the governor to sign it. We'll post Brad also asked, can we share a sample letter? CHAPA will be posting our letter that we're sending to conferees shortly. So you can use that and take that as a template, copy and paste, and use it to help you with your advocacy. A question on any updates on the mandate to inform any positive COVID-19 tests in housing for seniors. I don't have any updates on that. The requirement was put into place in July that senior housing had to report COVID cases amongst residents and staff. That requirement is still in place, so it's something that housing providers are working to do. We're also working, again, we've talked in the past that this has been something that's burdensome for housing providers to do. So we're working to see if we can either change how that law is followed, or to exempt senior housing providers from that. Again, because the legislative session was extended, there is still hope that we can get this through. But in the meantime, again, there is that requirement for senior housing providers to report on COVID cases, known COVID cases, I should say.
Eric, there's a question from Barbara on the IT bond bill that was passed last Friday. If it included $10 million for most vulnerable, which had money for helping undocumented immigrants pay expenses, starting with their rent.
Thank you, Abhi. And Barbara, unfortunately, I didn't follow the IT bond bill closely, so I couldn't speak to what's in it. But I can see what I can find out about the bill and could follow up after separately with you.
Okay, great.
Oh.
We have been distributing a lot of money to groups, and it's not sometimes with the CDCs, but sometimes the community action groups, and they're giving out cards and people are using it to pay rent and mortgage. So I think people may want to connect in their community. This money is supposed to be distributed by community foundations.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, if there are no other questions, I will say thank you. I did want to say that I would copy and paste the news brief with all of the updates that so please read that, check that out. And again, thank you. And I hope to see you all again soon on our next COVID call.